Aho, hana chini karagiwid. Hua kadega, hua nakshana egijage, hamte, hanichawira, haipin. Hello, everybody. Hua Kade here again, and we are in week 3 of our kinship modules. Once again, it's a pretty big topic, a lot of new vocabulary and a lot of concepts that are not exactly intuitive or things that we're generally used to. So I hope you guys have been working okay through the first 2 weeks of the kinship modules. Again, if you haven't gone through those or the previous modules, please make sure that you go back and take care of that first, because these all build on each other and you will get a lot farther and a lot faster if you're able to master the material in the previous modules. Once again, if you have questions on anything that we've already gone over, or anything at all, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the instructors. We are here to help. So again, I want to get right into it today. We're starting something new, and this is a little complex. This is where a lot of people get tripped up with kinship stuff. So we're going to work through the concepts rather slowly this time. I am going to jump right in. And we'll get going on kinship module 3.1. Again, this is our 3rd week of kinship. And we'll go over, as we always do, the learning targets. Just zip them all up here. So you learners are going to be able to recognize the terms for your parents, siblings, children when they're used in limited context. And remember, we have done siblings, we have done parents, we've done grandparents, and we've done our parents' siblings. So now we're going to move into the parents' siblings. Learners will be able to identify their parents, siblings, children by name and age. Learners will be able to ask others their parents, siblings, children names and ages. And learners will be able to tell about others' parents, siblings, and children. So we're going to dive right in. It sounds like a mouthful, but we'll get into that. So we're going to start off with our mother's side of the family. Now, what is fortunate for us here is that the terms and everything remains the same, whether you are male or female, when we're talking about your mother's siblings, children. So we're going to go ahead and build our family tree. So let's first start with, you can see there's 2 children there, and off on their mother's side, you have her brother, which would be, if you guys remember last week, her Dega, or their Dega. So whether you are male or whether you're a female, your mother's brother is your Dega. Now, if your Dega has children, now in English, this is when we start talking about cousins. Well, we don't have terms for cousins. We have different terms here, again, depending where they are in the family tree. So let's start off with, your Dega has a son or sons. Those are actually called hidegink. Hidegink. And what that literally means is little uncle. So hideg is uncle or Dega. And if your Dega has sons, they are called your little Degas. And the word for that is hidegink. Okay. Now, what about if your Dega has daughters or a daughter? This is where things get very different than what we're used to in the Western way of reckoning kinship. Your Dega's daughters are considered your hiunink. Hiunink. Now, if you'd gone through the previous modules, you remember that hiuni means mother. So your Dega's daughters are considered hiunink, or your little mothers. So again, on your mother's side of the family, your mother's brothers are called your Dega, and your Dega's sons are considered to be your little uncles, hidegink, and your Dega's daughters are considered to be your little mothers, hiunink. Okay. So what about your mother's sisters? So your mother's sister, as you remember, is also considered your mother, your little mother or your big mother, depending on if she's older or younger than your mom. But that's your mother. And this one is actually a little bit more intuitive. Let's look at if she has children. So this is your mother's sister, also one of your nannies. And if she has a son, it's considered to be your brother. That's your brother, if she has a son or son. So again, if you're young or an older brother, for a man, you would say hini. For a woman, you would say hichido. And whether you're a man or a woman, a younger brother would be hisung. But your mother's sister's sons, those are your brothers. And again, that's whether you are male or female. And similarly, if your mother's sister has daughter or daughters, those are also your sisters. Hinu for older sister, Waichke for younger sister if you're a man, and Hichunk for younger sister if you're a woman. Okay, so that doesn't seem as confusing, and that's a little bit more intuitive. Your mother's sister is also your mother, and since that's your mother, it makes sense that her children would be considered your siblings. The uncle side though, so your mother's brother is your Dega. That's where it gets a little tricky. Your Dega's sons are your little Dega, and your Dega's daughters are your little mothers, and that's the way Ho-Chunk reckons kinship. So that's from the mother's side, and that's regardless of whether you are male or female. But let's take a look at the father's side and go from the male perspective. So let's flip those around. So if you're male and you're looking at your father's side, what do you call your father's siblings' children? All right, well, let's take a look. Let's start again with the father's brother. Now remember that the father's brother is also considered your father. That's your Jaji. And once again, this part becomes a little bit intuitive. If your father's brother has sons, well, that's Hini or Hisum. Those are your brothers. And if your father's brother, who's also your father, has a daughter or daughters, those are your sisters. Hinu for older and Waichke for younger. Okay, so we learned that in a previous module. Now, how about your father's sister? Now, your father's sister is your Chui. Remember, in case of your father's sister is your Chui. So if your Chui has a son, you would call him Hichunshke. Hichunshke. And that literally means nephew. That's what a Dega calls their sister's kid. Hichunshke. You're technically their little Dega. So that's not as intuitive. Once you learn the whole system, it makes sense. You're able to backtrack and figure that out. But if you are a male, your father's sister's son is considered to be your nephew, Hichunshke. And your father's sister's daughter would be Hichujunk, which is niece, or Chujunk for short. So once again, this is the tricky part. If it's your father's brother, that's also your father, so his kids are going to be your siblings. That's fairly intuitive. But your father's sister, your Chui, your aunt, her kids are considered your nephew or your niece if you're male. So that's either Hichushke, which is a new word, or Hichujunk, which is niece. Okay? And for short, you can say Chunshke or Chujunk. That's what normally people would call that. Well, let's look at the father's side, though, from a female perspective. So if you're female and on your father's side, your father's brother, once again, that's considered your Jaji. So their kids would be considered your siblings. So if you're female, your father's brother has a son. If he's older than you call him Hichido. If he's younger than you, Hisung, just like your sibling, because that's what they are. They are your siblings. And if he has a daughter, those are your sisters. Hinu if older, Hichung if younger. Now let's look again, and here's where it's not so intuitive. We'll look at on the father's sister side. So if you're a female and your father's sister, your Chui, has a son, you would actually call him Hinink. Hinink. That is also your son. So your father's sister's son, you would also call son. Now, if you look back at a previous slide, you can kind of backtrack it because that kid would call your dad Dega, and your Dega's kids, your Dega's daughters are little mothers, so you are that boy's little mother. So that's why, so he would call you little Nani, you would call him Hinik. This gets weird and this gets tricky because you could have a son who's older than you. Happens all the time. That's where it kind of gets actually pretty fun when you see how these relationships start to shake out when you expand the tree a little bit more and apply it in real life. But for our purposes here, just get the concept down that your father's sister's son is also your son. All right, and that's from the female perspective. And as you might have already guessed, your father's sister's daughter would also be considered your daughter. And the word for that is hinuk. Hinuk. Okay. Now, there's a lot here, and I'm going to actually stop the video at this point because I think you should go back and rewatch. Go ahead and write it down your own family tree. Try to get the concept down. Like I said, it's complicated if you're not used to it. Now, if once you start applying it and working it into the language and work it into your life, it doesn't get so difficult anymore. Okay, so it's just different. It seems a little bit more complex than what we're used to, again, in the English speaking world. But hey, this is our Ho-Chun kinship system. It's actually quite beautiful and how everything works together. I'm hoping that our sessions with our eminent speakers, Zoom sessions, they're going to delve a little bit more into how these relationships work and they interact with each other, what the kind of codes and the different ways it's already prescribed relationships are and how we interact and deal with each other based on these kinship terms. It's pretty wonderful and it's pretty integral to the Ho-Chun culture, and they can share much more of that than I can. So be sure that you join us on Wednesday at 11 a.m. for our eminent speaker Zoom session where they can get into a little bit more of the cultural aspect of our kinship system. All right, so that's all I got for today. Again, that's a lot, and that's all we're going to cover this week. We're going to have one more kinship module next week just to kind of tie everything back up. We're going to have extra material for everybody to practice. And as always, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or to any of the instructors. We'll be happy to help you as best as we can. All right, so Begong Kita, everybody take care. Haizo Onwiaje.